Okay, so welcome back. We are still talking about geographic profiling, so hopefully you watched that video. A couple things that I just wanted to point out about that video. Um, Geographic profiling, right? It sounds logical in the sense that if you look at an area that has crime and you look at people who have committed certain crimes, being more statistically probable that they will commit crimes themselves, that you use these tools to kind of focus your resources. And that's the logic behind that. And that would be more of an absolute space approach. You're looking at these things. But the comments made by the gentleman at the end of the video about, there are some things behind these statistics. That's the relative space. And so something that we've heard a lot about talk in the press lately, right, with profiling and racial relations is that statistically speaking, you can see that there are numbers that show that people who are African American face a greater conviction rate. They are arrested far more often than the people who are not, right? And so you have to wonder about that. If those are your statistics that you're using, there seems to be an underlying issue with the statistics, right? And if that is your problem, then profiling really doesn't help. And so that's something to be very, very cautious of with geography. And geography has actually wrestled with that, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's continue our discussion. And talking about moral statistics and mapping issues, another example is public health. So maybe you've seen videos about, the spread of COVID-19, right? What states had it, what countries have it, where is it worse? One of the first modern uses of this was actually in 1855 by John Snow. He was mapping cholera outbreaks. Cholera is a bacterial-borne disease you get if you mainly drink dirty water, specifically water that's been polluted with human sewage. So in 1855, in the city of London, there were all these outbreaks of cholera. It's a horrible, deadly disease, and people were worried about it. John Snow had a theory as a doctor that what was causing it was polluted, contaminated water. So he made a map of all the households that reported somebody with cholera. Here's an example. And he put a red dot at every house that had someone who had gotten sick with cholera. And what he noticed was in this area, he then looked at where were there wells for drinking water. Click, 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 click. And this well was in the center of all these cases, just by looking with his naked eye. And he went to these wells and he investigated, and sure enough, these wells were polluted. Sewage was running into them from the streets. This exposed a lot of people to the first idea of health inequality, social geography. And a good example today is disease mapping. So hopefully, again, I don't break my computer. Let's see if this works here. Sometimes we call it environmental racism. Oh. And what that means is this. We usually see clusters of disease and other aspects geographically in nature that don't always show up right away. So an example is we can use these two maps, right? And let's map two different sets of data. Same area, but let's look at this. On this, we're going to look at, how about ozone? Better yet, lead paint indicator. This is the percentage of houses built before 1960 that have lead paint. And lead paint in older houses can chip off. Lead paint, if ingested by children, can lead to brain damage, developmental delay, and just not a good thing. It's why we've actually outlawed leaded paints and leaded gasoline. And let's go to Chicago. And I'll zoom in right here. So what this is showing you, right here on the left, there we go. Let's turn the legend on. So, the darker the red, the more the housing is old. And older housing tends to have lead paint. So let's really zoom in. Okay. Right here. High concentration. Now, if I look at the same area and I map something like, let's look at income. Percentage, let's do the same. percentage of households below the poverty level. So the darker the blue, the more in households are below the poverty level. And we do that, and this will take just a little bit. There we go. And I notice I'm zooming in. And what do we notice? We notice a very strong correlation. Okay, let's do this. There we go. Okay. So what do we notice? It's kind of tough to see, but I notice big, huge pockets of poverty right here in the west side of Chicago that correspond a lot with this. Let's take another one. Let's look at cancer risk. Risk of cancer from inhalation of toxic particles in the air. All right, so we're going to say there. So people who live in this area have a higher risk of cancer. And let's look at another legend. Let's look at how about employment? Oh, that's not what I want. How about education? What's the highest? So basically people who have gone to high school but no college. Update the map. Maybe not a good one. Let me try this. Let's go back to poverty. Households below poverty level. Okay. So what I'm getting at here is that where you see these areas where there's a higher risk of cancer, you tend to see poorer households, right? Where you have a lower risk, if you look here, you see less people who are poor. And what this is getting at, and this link I'll also make available to you live as well, is that we see people that live in poorer neighborhoods tend to have worse health. And a real life example I can think of is this. Until recently, there were two coal-fired power plants in Chicago that would burn coal to make electricity. And they were both located on the southwest side in the Pilsen neighborhood and the Little Village neighborhood, which have also been historically neighborhoods of lower income. Why were they built there? Why not right downtown? Why not Lincoln Square, Lincoln Park? Well, because usually it's cheaper to build in poorer neighborhoods. Land is cheaper. In other words, there's this unintentional environmental racism that is faced by people of color. Another one who explored this is Jane Addams. So Jane Addams, for those of you who don't know, let me just get within here. Jane Addams was the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. She won it for her work in Chicago. She was doing research into the Industrial Revolution, especially the workers who were living lives of very poor, very harsh lives. And she and her people that she was working with went out to the west side of the city and mapped. They went to every house they could find and they talked to the people living there. They talked about their living conditions, how much money they made, and they made this map from Hull House. Here's an example. This is Taylor Street. Here's DeKoven. Here's Des Plaines. This is the west side. Each color represented income. And what they were mapping was they were showing pockets of poverty, pockets of areas of people living in poor, horrible conditions had usually higher outbreaks of disease or had worse systems for sewage. So they were using these maps to build a case that, we need to invest in these areas. So we're going to pause it right here with this map, and when we come back, we'll talk about some more interesting topics.